The council had a habit of making decisions long before the facts arrived. That IT was one of its oldest traditions. Right after ceremonial robes, dramatic silence, and pretending the future of entire star systems should be decided by people who needed half a day just to agree on refreshments. That I was there because I was too unimportant to matter. Officially, I serve as a junior record keeper under High Clerk Orin. In practice, that meant I copied statements, arranged vote sheets, and tried very hard not to be noticed by anyone powerful, angry, or proud enough to have their own banner. Since the chamber that day was full of all three, my plan for survival was simple: sit still, write fast, avoid eye contact, and above all, do not become part of the lesson. The Hall of Measures had been built to make visitors uncomfortable. That much was obvious even to a low clerk like me. 7 tall rings of black stone rose around the chamber, each one lined with glowing symbols older than some star nations. The central floor was a perfect circle of pale metal, polished so clean it looked almost sacred. It had been used for hearings, emergency rulings, military declarations, and once, according to a very popular legal joke, a wedding so disastrous it later became a court precedent. Above that floor floated the witness platform, held in place by gravitic fields and washed in cold blue light, as if truth itself had been arrested and placed on display for inspection. That morning, the glowing hearing glyph above the chamber doors changed. Humanity, the quiet murmur passed through the tears. Not fear, not concern, approval, the kind of soft, pleased sound people make when they think something complicated is about to become neatly simple. Counselor Vesh leaned forward from the second tier, polished horns catching the chamber light. "At last," he said, with the kind of voice that always sounded one breath away from insult. Something straightforward. Nothing was ever straightforward when Vesh said it. He announced simplicity the way predators announce peace, with all their teeth showing. Across from him, Counselor Elan adjusted her veil membranes and looked down at the central display. "The reports are consistent," she said. "Highly emotional, prone to improvised violence, competitive to the point of absurdity, strong group bonding, frequent insubordination, dangerous loyalty patterns." Counselor Bao added, "They also leap from working aircraft for recreation." A few council members made sounds of disgust. I kept writing. "It is called sport," muttered someone from the upper tiers. "It is called insanity," Bao replied. That set the tone for the morning. Report after report was presented. Military analysts, trade envoys, border observers, a very shaken agricultural inspector who had made the mistake of attending a human festival on a colony moon. He described fire, fermented drinks, shouting contests, mechanical animals, and one small child who had asked him if he was the weirdest horse ever. That comment created laughter in some tiers, offense in others, and a formal request for clarification from Counselor Tell, who had never understood humor and treated all jokes like possible threats. Then came the biological review. A rotating human body appeared over the chamber floor in hollow blue light. Dense bones, high endurance, strange recovery patterns, redundant systems, a body plan that seemed almost offended by the idea of dying easily. One analyst spoke of fracture recovery, another of blood loss survival, another of operating in heat and cold levels that would send many council species into organ failure. Then came the part that made the room quiet: predator eyes, endurance hunting ancestry, a pain threshold high enough to be concerning, and social attachment so powerful it could override self-preservation. Primitive, Vesh said. Adaptive, Elan answered. Very difficult to kill, Bao said. That more than anything else earned agreement that I should explain something. The council did not simply describe species. That IT arranged the political galaxy around those descriptions. Harmless species were praised and gently guided. Useful species were welcomed with smiles and invoices. Dangerous species were watched, managed, limited, bribed, or crushed, depending on how frightened the council felt that season. And Death World species were always a problem. Any people born on a brutal world learned the wrong lessons for polite civilization. They were too alert, too practical, too comfortable with risk. They were far too willing to solve moral questions by picking up whatever heavy object happened to be nearby. Most Deathworlders eventually learned restraint. Humans, according to the projections floating above us, had looked at restraint, thought about it briefly, and then built 12 different kinds of explosives just to see what happened at last. High speaker Jolin struck the resonance chime. Silence rolled through the hall. Jolin was ancient, pale, and so perfectly controlled that even his annoyance looked formal. We will hear final recommendations. A military assessor stepped onto the lower platform. Commander Rail of Fleet Analysis, gray uniform. One damaged antenna. Voice like stone dragged across steel. Recommendation, he said, humanity should be placed under restricted entry classification pending behavioral review. The species shows excessive tolerance for risk, dangerous innovation under pressure, and unstable moral response patterns. Jolin tilted his head. Define the last point. Rail activated the tactical display. Point 3 incidents appeared. On one world, human miners had broken a pirate blockade using excavation charges, cargo haulers, and what looked embarrassingly like a giant or magnet. On another, a human medical convoy had driven through active bombardment to rescue civilians from the wrong side of a border war. On a third, a human cargo crew had boarded a burning station section to save trapped technicians from a species they were not even allied with. Rail looked mildly irritated by his own evidence. They do not behave. Within stable predictive models, he said, they are capable of severe violence and extreme compassion in the same operational window. This makes them difficult to forecast. Vesh gave a cold snort. That is not complexity. That is lack of discipline. Rail's face did not move. With respect, counselor, the human phrase would be, both can be true. A pause followed. Council members hated it when lower-ranking officers said something wiser than they had. Vesh tapped one claw against the stone. We are not here to admire anomalies. We are here to classify them. Their world contains unstable weather, predatory oceans, violent fauna, disease density, and gravity stress above average tolerance. They poison themselves with stimulants. They consume capsaicin willingly. At that, several council members visibly recoiled. That was the first moment I nearly laughed. Not because he was wrong. He was completely correct. Human food had become a growing topic in xenobiological trauma reports. There were sauces on Earth that had already been classified in neighboring systems as low-grade chemical threats. And what almost made me laugh was the seriousness of it. Galactic leadership was discussing condiments with the same tone usually reserved for war doctrine, while pretending this was about security. Then Jolin turned toward the witness platform. Has the human representative arrived? An usher near the great door stiffened. Yes, High Speaker. Every eye in the chamber shifted. The doors opened. The human entered without armor, without ceremony, and without even the smallest trace of proper fear. That was the first surprise. The second was as she looked around the Hall of Measures as if she had just walked into an overpriced restaurant with a dress code she already intended to ignore. She was smaller than I expected. Dark formal jacket, simple trousers, polished boots, a silver insignia at the collar marking the Earth delegation. Her hair was tied back neatly. Her hands were emptied in a visible weapon, in a visible translation crown, either, which meant she had an implant. Efficient, confident, far too calm, the usher announced her. Representative Mara Vale of the Soul Union. Mara stepped onto the witness platform, looked up at 7 tiers of alien authority, and smiled. It was not a wide smile. That would have been easier, and it was a small, patient smile, the kind used by teachers, gamblers, and people who had brought a better knife than everyone expected. Counselor Vesh already looked offended, a promising beginning. High Speaker Jolin spoke first. Representative Vale. Humanity has been called to answer the proposed classification. Mara glanced up at the hearing glyph. I guessed that from the giant, glowing sign. Several counselors froze. I lowered my head at once and wrote faster, so no one would notice that my mouth had fallen open. To his credit, Jolin did not react. You understand the seriousness of this hearing? Yes, Mara said. You want to know whether humans are a threat, a nuisance, a diplomatic headache, or all three. Counselor Bao leaned forward. And what is your answer? She looked at him for one thoughtful second. Depends to who? A stir moved through the chamber. Vesh bared his teeth. Arrogance from a probationary species is unwise. Mara turned her head slightly toward him. Then it's a good thing I'm not trying to impress you. I replayed that moment in my mind many times afterward. Not because it was loud, not because it was dramatic. Representatives had defied the council before. Usually once. Usually briefly. Usually right before their governments replaced them, apologized for them, or denied having ever met them. And oh, what made it different was the ease of IT. No raged. No panic. No performance. Just clean dismissal. As if Counselor Vesh was not a feared senior statesman, but only a rude man delaying a line somewhere. The room changed. You could feel it happen. Jolan lifted one hand before Vesh could respond with something politically expensive. Representative Vale, he said, you may begin your statement. Mara nodded. She stood with her weight even on both feet. Not stiff, not defensive, not theatrical. I read the pre-hearing summaries, she said. I appreciate the honesty. Some of it, anyway. Then she looked up at the tears, calm as ever. You think we're violent? Fair. You think we're reckless? Also fair. You think we bond too hard, improvise too much, and react badly when cornered. Her small smile returned. Again fair. Send part 2, and I'll continue in the same style. Part 2 thought for a couple of seconds here. Is part 2 in the same length feel? Dramatic rhythm, simple wording, and story style, with no timestamps and keeping the same pattern from the source text. It continues from Mara beginning her statement through the council, starting to lose control of the room. That answer hit the chamber harder than it should have. Admitting weakness was not normal here. Species came before the council polished, rehearsed, and shining with carefully prepared lies. Even aggressive civilizations suddenly discovered poetry and restraint when they wanted favorable classification. But Mara did not polish anything. She just kept speaking. Honestly, she said, if I were reading our file cold, I'd have concerns too. That threw them off. Not because she had defended humanity badly, because she had not defended it at all. Not in the usual way. She had agreed just enough to make everyone listen harder. Then her expression sharpened. But here's the part you keep circling without saying out loud. You're not really afraid humans are violent. Plenty of species are violent. You trade with some of them. You vote with some of them. You even sign marriage treaties with some of them when the political margins look good enough. A few members shifted in their seats. That line had landed exactly where she wanted it to. No, Mara said, her eyes moving slowly across the tears. What bothers you is that humans are hard to sort. Now the chamber was fully listening. You like neat labels? Harmless, hostile, compliant, useful, predictable, manageable. We don't stay in any of those boxes for long, and that irritates you. Vesh snapped almost immediately. This council is not governed by irritation. Mara turned to him without any hurry at all. Really? Because I've been here less than a minute and half your face says otherwise. There was not a sound escaped from somewhere high in the observer gallery. A laugh. Just one dot short, startled, badly hidden IT died at once, but the damage had already been done. Council hearings hated laughter. Laughter made authority unstable. It made grand people look temporary. Vesh rose halfway from his seat. You mistake tolerance for weakness. No, Mara said, still calm enough to make it worse. I'm beginning to suspect you mistake volume for importance. For one full heartbeat, even I stopped writing. Then the room broke into movement. Claws scraped stone. Membranes tightened. Translation bands buzzed. The emotional temperature of the chamber climbed several levels in seconds. High speaker Jolan struck the resonance chime again. Enough? His voice was measured, but the hall obeyed. Representative Vale will complete her statement. Mara dipped her head once. Thank you. Then she looked back at the tears as if nothing unusual had happened. Humans come from a world that tries to kill us in creative ways, she said. That part of your report is accurate. Predators, storms, heat, cold, pressure, disease, poison, parasites, sharp things in the water, sharp things on land, sometimes even sharp things in the plants. We got through that by being stubborn, social, curious, and yes, sometimes unreasonably aggressive. Sometimes, Bao muttered. She heard him anyway. Commander, your people once burned a moon because smugglers annoyed your fuel routes. Bao folded his arms. That moon was evacuated. Mara nodded once. See? Context. Some of the counselors hated that. Some of them, I noticed, were listening more carefully now. Mara kept going. You say human behavior is inconsistent. I say your model is missing the part that matters. Humans get dangerous when we decide something matters. Her voice never rose. It only became cleaner. Sometimes that's territory. Sometimes it's family. Sometimes it's a promise. Sometimes it's somebody we barely know who still looks like they need help. The chamber stayed quiet. She had stopped sounding like a witness and started sounding like a problem none of them had prepared for properly. While everyone else is still writing policy language about acceptable concern levels, she said, humans usually move first. That line hung in the air. Then she spread one hand lightly. Yes, we build weapons. Terrible ones, sometimes. We also build rescue ships, field hospitals, shelters, supply chains, and emergency networks in places sensible species stay away from. Her eyes swept the chamber. We joke during disasters because if we stop joking, fear gets too much room. We can look ridiculous right up until the exact moment everything catches fire. And then suddenly, the loud primates who were making notes about have formed evacuation routes, rerouted power, and repaired your life support system with tape, profanity, and a maintenance manual downloaded from a server no one admits still exists. That got a reaction, not from the whole chamber, from Commander Rail. Only a tiny one, but I saw it. Mara saw it too. You know exactly what I mean, she said. Rail did not answer. He only stared at the display in front of him. Vesh made a sound of disgust. So your defense is that your species is improvisational. Our defense, Mara said, is that when the universe gets ugly, you want humans nearby. That line landed like dropped metal. Heavy, sharp, final. Even I felt it. Not because it sounded rehearsed. It did not. It sounded lived in. Earned. Counselor Lon tilted her head slightly. And when the universe is peaceful, for the first time, Mara's smile became a little more real. Then we barbecue things, argue about music, make government more complicated than it needs to be, flirt badly, invent sports no one asked for, and start long network wars over nonsense. Counselor Tell leaned forward. What kind of nonsense? Mara did not even blink. You do not have enough time. A strange tremor passed through the room, then, not quite laughter, something worse. Warmth, the beginning of fondness that I felt happening, and so did Vesh. That was the moment he changed tactics, that he stood fully now, robes falling in hard fold around him, crest raised high. He looked every bit what he wanted to be, authority made flesh. High Speaker, he said, I request direct inquiry. Jolan answered at once. Granted. Vesh descended from his tier with deliberate slowness, each step chosen for effect. He stopped below the witness platform and looked up at Mara as though examining a dangerous animal through reinforced glass. Representative Vale, he said, would humanity submit to council oversight under provisional death world regulation? No, she said instantly, no pause. No Solfterfrassing. No political cushion. Just no. The chamber erupted in murmurs. Vesh spread his hands slightly. There, at last. Honesty. Mara's expression did not change. You haven't asked the rest. His eyes narrowed. Very well. Why not? Because oversight, in council language, usually means control without accountability. That made several council members sit straighter. Mara continued before any of them could interrupt. It means you classify first, intervene second, never apologize, and then act surprised when local populations resent being handled like unstable pets. That was bold enough to border on suicidal. I wrote every word anyway. Vesh began to circle slowly beneath the platform. And yet you stand before this body asking acceptance. Mara looked down at him. I stand before this body correcting your assumptions. Acceptance is your problem. Somewhere to my left, High Clerk Oren inhaled too sharply. I had served under him for years. That was the closest I had ever seen him come to public emotion. Vesh pointed one claw upward. You admit your species is violent. You admit weak impulse control. You admit insubordination. You admit resistance to external governance. By your own testimony, humanity fits the definition of a strategic threat. Mara folded her hands behind her back. Only if you insist on becoming one. The chamber went still. That was the first real silence of the hearing. Not performance silence. Not offended silence. Something colder. Choice. Everyone in the room felt it at once. Vesh's voice dropped. Is that a threat from the Soul Union? No, Mara said. That is advice. She turned then, not just to him, but to the whole council. You've spent this hearing asking whether humans belong in a cage, on a leash, or behind a warning label. That's the wrong question. Jolan's face had become unreadable. And what is the right question? Mara faced him fully. When everything goes bad, she said, what kind of people do you want answering your call? No one replied. She went on. Because that moment always comes. Border failure, reactor breach, plague flare, pirate strike, crop collapse, habitat rupture, bad timing, worse politics. It always comes. Her words were simple. That made them stronger. And when it does, all your neat labels stop being useful. She lifted one hand, palm open. You want the elegant species with perfect compliance records? Fine. They'll send a committee. A few expressions tightened. You want the efficient species with excellent military posture? Fine. They'll protect their own interests first. More silence. You want the kind of people who calculate acceptable losses before deciding who is worth saving? You already have plenty of those. Her hand lowered. Where you call humans. Now nobody in the chamber moved. And humans show up complaining, sarcastic, undercaffeinated, carrying tools they absolutely should not have modified themselves, and somehow ready to risk everything for people they met 20 minutes ago. The stillness after that felt enormous. Then, of all beings in the chamber, Counselor Tell asked the question no one expected. Why? Mara blinked once. What? Why? Tell repeated. Why would humans risk themselves for unrelated outsiders? Every person in the room leaned, just slightly, toward her answer. Mara looked at him for a long moment. And when she spoke, something gentler entered her face. Because after enough time spent being fragile in a dangerous universe, you start recognizing the look on someone else's face when they realize help might not come. I forgot to breathe. That more than any insult, any joke, any challenge changed the room. You could feel the chamber splitting into new shapes. Those who trusted her less. Those who trusted her more. Those who hated being moved by what she had said. And those who hated that the others were moved at all. Counselor Bao broke the silence sharply. Words. Elegant words. We are discussing strategic classification, not emotional storytelling. Mara nodded. Fair. Then she touched the console built into the witness platform that a new display burst open above the chamber floor. Not council data. Human data. Verified incident logs. Joint operation records. Rescue reports. Defense charts. Engineering interventions. Outbreak response figures. Supply missions. Pages and pages of hard numbers. The whole chamber shifted again. Over the last 12 standard years, Mara said, human ships have responded to non-human distress calls more than 200 times outside treaty obligation. Human medical teams have entered 14 contagion zones after others withdrew. Human cargo crews have broken embargo threats to deliver food to colonies that couldn't pay. Human engineers have restored failing life support systems on stations we did not own. Bao found it. That cannot be verified. Before Mara could answer, Commander Rail spoke. Oh, he said, sounding as though he disliked being useful. It can. Every head turned toward him that he did not look pleased. Fleet analysis cross-checked multiple incidents after receiving human record copies. The data is accurate. Mara only inclined her head toward him, and oh triumph, and oh smugness. Just acknowledgement. Vesh recovered first. Altruism does not erase danger. No, Mara said. It explains it. Then her tone changed again. Now she was not defending humanity. Now she was warning them. Let me save you some time, she said. If you classify us as manageable tools, you'll be disappointed. If you classify us as monsters, you'll create the very problem you claim to fear. If you classify us as primitives, you'll keep underestimating us until that becomes expensive. She let that settle. The best outcome is simple. Treat us like people. Strange people, yes. Loud people, definitely. Occasionally exhausting people. I won't argue that. But people, Vesh said dryly, who once fought a continental war over trade taxes. Mara spread her hands. And now we mostly argue about those online, which is growth. That did it. Real laughter this time. Not much, not long, but enough scattered, shocked, impossible to pull back once it started. And high speaker Jolan did not stop it immediately. That mattered. Vesh, however, looked like he wanted to criminalize laughter itself. He turned sharply toward Jolan. High speaker, this proceeding is being derailed by performance. Mara answered before Jolan could. No, it's being derailed by the fact that you arrived wanting a label and found a mirror instead. Vesh swung back toward her. You are in no position to lecture this council. And you, Mara said, now suddenly colder than before, are in no position to talk down to a species you clearly don't understand while pretending that ignorance is wisdom. There was again that shift, that dangerous stillness. The chamber seemed to narrow around them, that Vesh's crest flattened. Careful. Mara held his gaze. No, she said softly. You be careful. And for the first time in that entire hearing, no one in the Hall of Measures looked at the human representative like she was the one on trial. Send part 3, and I'll continue exactly in the same style. Part 3 here is part 3, continuing in the same depth, pacing, simple wording, and cinematic storytelling style, with no timestamps and matching the original structure and emotional build. Mara stepped forward slightly on the platform. The blue light cut across her face, sharpening every line. You want to classify us? She said. Fina, here's the simplest classification you'll ever get. No one interrupted her now. Not even Vesh. Humans are the ones you want beside you when the hull cracks. Her voice stayed steady. We're the ones you want between your children and whatever is waiting in the dark. The chamber did not move. We'll mock your traditions, question your systems, eat things you consider dangerous, and probably offend your sense of order within the first hour. A few expressions tightened. But when it matters, she continued, we'll stand there anyway. Her eyes moved slowly across the tiers. And if you decide we're animals to be controlled, tools to be pointed, or problems to be managed from a distance, she paused, then you'll learn exactly what kind of people death worlds create. That was not a threat. That was something worse than a boundary. Even Counselor Bao had nothing to say. High Speaker Jolan watched her carefully now. Representative Vale, he said, are you speaking for the official position of the Soul Union? Mara met his gaze without hesitation. I'm speaking, she said, for every human who's tired of being judged by people who confuse survival traits with moral failures. That should have ended IT, that IT should have been enough. The chamber was already stretched tight with tension. The arguments had been made. The lines had been drawn. But history has a habit of interrupting speeches. The first alarm sounded, T first, no one reacted. Council chambers were old places. They rang, chimed, pulsed, and echoed for dozens of ceremonial reasons. Half of politics depended on sound effects. Then the second alarm came. Sharp, precise, military. Everything changed. The great doors burst open and a fleet courier rushed inside, armor half sealed, one shoulder smoking as if he had come straight through a damaged transit field. He dropped to one knee. High speaker, he gasped, emergency transmission from the outer defense ring. Unknown vessels have breached the gate. The chamber exploded into noise. Identity? Not confirmed. Numbers? At least 19 contacts. Fust. Masked signatures. Civilian traffic? Collapsing. Multiple lanes at risk. Commander Rail was already moving. How long? He demanded. Minutes, the courier said. Less if they push engines hard. The display above the chamber shifted instantly. The comm reports vanished. In their place came live tactical data. Red lines cut through the map. Civilian transports, fuel relays, dock clusters, defense ships trying to pivot into formation. And near the outer corridor, a growing wave of panic. Voices crashed into each other. Seal the inner routes. Recall embassy vessels. Where is home fleet? Evacuate the galleries. Get station control online. I sat frozen, stylus still in my hand. This was a real council, not calm, not wise, not controlled. Just frightened beings shouting over one another while pretending they were still in charge. And in the middle of all of it, the human representative did something so strange I thought I had imagined it. She looked at the tactical display. Then she looked at Commander Rail and said very clearly, "Well, this is awkward." Rail snapped toward her. "This chamber is now under military authority." "Fantastic," Mara said. "Do you take suggestions or only assign blame?" Jolin's voice cut through the noise. "Representative, stand down." But Mara was no longer paying attention to rank. She was studying the map. Those ships were moving too cleanly, too precisely. "Those aren't raiders," she said. Rail stopped. "Explain." She pointed at the display. "Look at the spread. Too organized for pirates. Too fast for intimidation tactics. And they came through a trade choke right before peak traffic shift." Rail narrowed his eyes. "They're not here to steal cargo," Mara said. "They're here to turn the station lanes into wreckage and force panic." Rail's voice dropped. "On what basis?" Mara didn't hesitate. "On the basis that humans invented half the dirty tricks in that pattern and wrote history books pretending to regret it." The room went quiet again. The courier swallowed hard. "There's more. One of the trapped convoys is carrying juvenile delegates." That changed everything. Mara's expression shifted instantly. The humor vanished. The sarcasm disappeared. Only focus remained. "What ships are closest?" she asked. Rail answered automatically. "Two customs cutters. One damaged escort. Defense wings still forming." He paused, then added, almost reluctantly, "One human vessel. Diplomatic escort corvette." "How far?" 8 minutes. Mara took one breath. Then she said the sentence that split the entire day in half. "Patch me through to the corvette." "Hi, Speaker." Jolin stepped forward. "You're not authorized to issue commands in this chamber." Mara turned to him, and I will never forget her face in that moment. Not angry, not defiant, certain. With respect, she said, "I wasn't asking for permission." In that single instant, everyone in the Hall of Measures understood the same thing. They had spent hours debating what to call humans. Now reality had arrived, and the human had already started acting. Send Part 4, and I'll continue the next section with the same intensity and structure. Part 4 here is Part 4, continuing with the same cinematic pacing, emotional intensity, simple wording, and structured storytelling, keeping the exact pattern and depth, and no timestamps. The chamber did not approve. Of course it didn't. High Speaker Jolin stepped forward, robes cutting across the floor with controlled anger. "Representative Vale, stand down immediately." Mara didn't even look at him. "Patch me through," she repeated. The operations aide at the console froze. His hands hovered over the controls. He looked at Jolin. He looked at Commander Rail. Then he looked at Mara. For a second, I almost felt sorry for him. IT is difficult to decide whose orders matter when everyone powerful is trying to look like authority while the situation is already collapsing. Commander Rail made the choice. Patch her through. Jolin turned sharply. "Commander, if she's right," Rail said, not moving his eyes from the display. "We don't have time for protocol." That sentence landed harder than most speeches that day. Usefulness had just outranked hierarchy. The console lit up that a human officer appeared in hard blue light above the chamber. Broad shoulders. Short hair. A scar cutting through one eyebrow. Red warning lights flashing across his face. "This is Captain Sun of the Corvette Archer," he said. "We see the lane collapse." "Speak fast." Mara didn't waste a word. "Possible coordinated strike at Sealand Gate. Civilian convoy trapped. Juvenile delegates on board. Unknown hostile count minimum 19. You're the closest human asset." The captain's eyes narrowed. "Understood. We're not built for this." "Exactly," Mara said, "which is why I'm about to say something the council won't like." Vesh hissed loudly, but no one stopped her. "Captain," Mara continued, "do not engage the main formation." Sun looked sharply at the tactical feed. "That's their center push. Go into the traffic lanes," she said. Cut through relay shadow. Pull the lead ships away from the convoy. That puts us in their firing line. It also breaks their timing, Mara said. They're counting on panic movement. You disrupt the pattern, they lose control. The captain gave a short, humorless smile. That sounds very human. That's because I'm talking to you, not writing a committee report. Fair enough. High Speaker Jolin finally snapped. No foreign vessel will take unauthorized military action inside council space. Mara turned her head slightly. Then authorize it. You do not set terms here. Then watch children die while you prepare a formal response. That ended the argument. Not cleanly, not calmly, but completely. There are moments when words stop being language and become pressure. This was one of them. On the display, Captain Sun spoke again. Does this chamber want our help or not? No one answered quickly enough. Mara did. Yes. Vesh nearly lost control. You insolent. Rail cut across him. Archer is granted provisional emergency authority. A collective breath moved through the room. He had just stepped around the council. Inside its own chamber. Mara gave him a quick nod. Good decision. Try not to regret it. I probably will, he said. Proceed. On the display, the Archer turned. Engines flared. Helm. New vector, Sun ordered. Mark convoy. Engineering. Give me speed from somewhere questionable. A voice answered from his bridge. Sir, that's our specialty. Mara allowed herself the smallest breath. Good. The tactical display zoomed in. The attacking ships were dark, fast, and precise. They moved like a blade cutting through soft material. Not random. Not chaotic. Deliberate point. One of the custom ships vanished in a burst of light, and O1 spoke. The convoy, 6 civilian transports, began to scatter. One drifted too far. Another vented atmosphere. Emergency signals flared everywhere. Mara's jaw tightened. Get me station traffic control. A new window opened. A control officer appeared, overwhelmed, hands moving across multiple panels at once. We can't stabilize the lanes. You don't need stable, Mara said. You need predictable. Freeze outer lanes. Redirect all non-essential traffic. Create controlled choke points. That will cause collisions. You already have collisions, she replied. I'm choosing where they happen. The officer hesitated, then nodded, and obeyed. I realized something then. The room had already shifted. Not officially, and O1 had said it out loud, but everything now moved around the human. Questions went to her. Eyes followed her. Even disagreement focused on her. She had become a center simply by acting like problems were meant to be handled, not discussed. I had never seen anything like it on the display. The Archer appeared. Small, fast, completely outmatched. IT should not have been there. Visual. Acquired, Captain Sun said. They haven't noticed us yet. They will, Mara replied. Give them a reason. How rude should we be? Mara studied the map for half a second, then said, memorable. The Archer fired. Not at the ships, the structures beneath them. Old cargo frames exploded into spinning debris and signal noise. The enemy formation broke instantly. Their perfect shape twisted apart. They were sharing telemetry, Mara said. Now they have to think for themselves. Vesh snapped. You're endangering every ship in that corridor. Yes, Mara said, which is why I'm glad they attacked before it was too late to stop them. The Archer cut beneath the convoy point. 2 hostile ships followed. Then 4. Then more. They're taking the bait, Rail said. Mara didn't smile. Of course they are. Nobody likes being embarrassed. Alarms filled the Archer's bridge. 6 on us, Sun reported. Maybe more. Your hull won't enjoy this, Mara said. Tell it to file a complaint. Even under pressure, someone on his bridge laughed. Jolin turned to Rail. Where are the defense wings? 2 minutes out. We don't have 2 minutes. Rail didn't look away from the display. We have the human ship. That sentence felt strange in the Hall of Measures. Stranger still, no one disagreed. The convoy moved forward through controlled chaos. Point 1 transport lagged behind. Its engines flickered weakly. Rear ship is falling back, Mara said instantly. A hostile vessel broke formation and moved toward it. Can't turn in time, Sun said. Then don't, Mara replied. Vent your coolant. There was a pause. Do what? Dump coolant across its path. Blind its sensors. That only works up close. Then get close. On the display, the Archer released a cloud of freezing vapor. The enemy ship flew straight into it. Its sensors glitched, its path shifted, just enough that IT struck debris and spun away, burning that N01 in the chamber made a sound. Representative, Sun said, voice sharper now, I'm updating my opinion of you. Don't, she replied. It'll ruin my reputation. The damaged transport pushed forward. Commander Rail took control of the room. Station batteries, target hostile. Defense wings, prioritize convoy. Traffic control, hold pattern until further orders. Now the council moved, not gracefully, but effectively. Orders flew. Systems responded. For a moment, they almost looked like leaders again. Almost. Then the second problem appeared, boarding pods, dozens of them. Breaking away from the attack group and heading toward the station itself. They're going inside. Someone whispered. Mara's face hardened. Of course they are. Counselor Vesh looked at her with sharp satisfaction. Your analysis was incomplete. She didn't even turn. No. Their plan just had layers. The station map expanded. If those pods reach Dock C, Rail said, they can cut power across half the ring. Seal the docks. Jolin ordered that the security officer appeared on screen. Too many civilians inside. Sealing now traps them. A choice, cold and immediate. Systems or lives. Mara spoke before the argument could grow. Don't seal. Divide the corridors. Lock sections. Make them fight slow. That requires more personnel. Then use the workers. They're not soldiers. Mara looked at him. They're defending their home. That's usually worse. A pause. Then the officer nodded and acted. The map shifted again, doors locking. Routes changing. Teams moving. Somewhere far from the chamber, fear had turned into running feet. And for the first time that day, the council was no longer debating humans. They were depending on 1.Send Part 5, and I'll continue the next section, Combat plus Emotional Peak plus Resolution Setup. In the same style. Part 5 here is Part 5, final part, continuing and completing the story with the same depth, pacing, emotional intensity, and simple language, following the same structure and storytelling. Pattern and no timestamps. By the time they reached Dock C, the situation had already turned ugly. Smoke filled the corridors. Emergency lights painted everything in red. Civilians were packed behind makeshift barriers. Some injured, some holding others. Station workers in half-sealed gear dragged crates into place, building cover with whatever they could find, and deeper inside the docking lanes, gunfire. Real, sharp, violent. Commander Rail took one look and understood everything. Report. A security officer stepped forward. Multiple breach points. Hostiles pushing inward. We've contained 2 corridors. Lost 1 maintenance lane. They're heading for power routing and dock control. How many? At least 20 inside. Maybe more. Mara crouched near a floor display. What kind? Masked armor. Movement suggests hired teams. Not official military. Rail nodded once. Which means discipline breaks when the plan fails. Good, Mara said quietly. She didn't say it with cruelty. She said it like someone finding a weak point in a wall. Then she looked at the workers nearby. They weren't soldiers, mechanics. Technicians. Load handlers. One still wearing part of a service apron. Scared. Angry. Not leaving. Who's running maintenance? Mara asked. A heavy-set worker stepped forward. I am. Can you vent coolant into Corridor 9? He frowned. Yes, but why? Because their helmets rely on heat tracking, Mara said. Blind that, and they start guessing. The worker blinked, then gave a slow, impressed nod. That's nasty. Thank you. Rail glanced at her. You've done this before. No, Mara said. I just know humans. That answer should not have made sense, but somehow it did. The next minutes turned into controlled chaos. Security teams shifted positions. Maintenance rerouted coolant and pressure lines. Civilians were pushed further back. Rail divided his forces, and Mara moved between them all. Not like a commander, like a problem solver. Fast. Focused. Sharp. At one point, a shaking worker asked, What if they break through? Mara handed him a cutting tool. Then make them regret it. The worker gave a nervous laugh, but his hands steadied. That was the moment I understood something important. Human humor wasn't decoration, that IT was armor. The first push came fast. Figures moved through the smoke. Armored, precise, confident. Then the coolant flooded the corridor. White vapor filled the space. The attackers fired blindly. Security struck from both sides. Point 2 dropped instantly. Another slipped, vanished into an open shaft, and was gone. Mara didn't celebrate. Move, she said. They'll adjust. The fight spread. Not clean, not organized, at a mess of corridors, tools, barricades, and panic. A station cook threw a canister hard enough to drop an attacker. A child bit through part of a suit joint before being dragged away. That a guard used a cargo hook to pull someone into a closing door. Nothing about it was elegant. Everything about it was real. That T1 point, while taking cover behind a failing power unit, Mara said, completely serious, if we survive this, no one is going to believe the maintenance story. Rail fired past the corner. I already regret meeting your species. Give it time, she said. It gets worse. The hardest moment came near the civilian shelter. Point 3 attackers broke through a side path. Too close, too fast. That Rail's team was pinned down. They couldn't reach in time. Mara moved, and oh hesitation. She ran straight across open ground under fire, slammed into a rolling cart, drove it into the lead attacker. Both crashed into a wall. She hit the floor, rolled, came up and fired. Point 1 down. The second turned toward her. The shot came. But it didn't hit her. IT struck a shield. Counselor Alon stood there, holding. A calm, focused, temporary cooperation, she said. Mara blinked once. Didn't expect that. Don't get used to it. Rail's team arrived seconds later. The rest didn't last long. After that, something shifted. The attackers began to fail. Not loudly, not dramatically, just slowly. They lost timing. They lost confidence. They started retreating. Outside, the defense fleet finally arrived. The Archer, damaged, barely holding, fed them targeting data. Point 1 by 1. The hostile signals disappeared. Then the message came. Outer corridor secured. No one cheered. They were too tired. Instead, the entire dock seemed to exhale, like it had just remembered how to survive. Mara sat down where she was, and oh ceremony, and oh strength left to pretend. Her sleeve torn at a cut near her head. Breathing hard. Rail stood nearby, equally worn. You disobeyed direct authority, he said. Yes. You entered a combat zone as a diplomat. Yes. You caused multiple protocol violations. Yes. He looked at her for a long moment, then said, annoying. Mara smiled tiredly. That means you like me. It means I might not shoot you later. Progress. Even Alon, checking on the children nearby, almost smiled. Later, when the council gathered again, the chamber felt different, quieter, honest in a way it hadn't been before. The same glyph still hovered above. Humanity. But now it didn't feel like a labeled IT, felt like a question that had already been answered. Vesh spoke again. That of course he did. The incident changes nothing. Human recklessness remains evident. Mara stood calmly. Children survived. That is not the point. It is exactly the point. Alon stood next. My student lives because of them, she said. I will not ignore that. Then Commander Rail stepped forward in O ceremony, in O performance. Just truth. Humans are dangerous, he said. All previous reports were correct. Vesh looked satisfied. Then Rail continued. But we misunderstood what that means. Silence. We treated those traits as weaknesses. They are not. Under crisis, they are strengths. Now no one moved. Humans are not manageable, not predictable, not easy to control. He paused. They're the ones who act when others hesitate. That changed everything. The final vote came. Lights flashed across the chamber. Point 1 by 1. Then the result appeared. Humanity recognized. Not as a threat, not as a problem, but as something else, something harder to define, something more dangerous and more valuable than expected. Later, when everything was quiet again, I found Mara looking out at the stars. Were you afraid? I asked. She nodded a lot. That surprises me. It shouldn't, she said. Bravery without fear is just misunderstanding the situation. I wrote that down carefully because in the end, that was the truth the council had missed. Humans weren't fearless. They were afraid. They just acted anyway. And somewhere across systems and years, a new idea began to spread. Not official, not approved, but true. When everything breaks, call the humans.